Chapter 10 Night Walker. Have you ever wondered what becomes of those who wander, not only through desolate streets, but within the darkest corners of their own souls? There are places in the world where the line between darkness and despair is thin. Shadows grow teeth, and the night seems to breathe. In this city there is a legend, a whisper carried through the alleys and murmured between cigarette drags. They call it the Night Walker, a figure that prowls the darkest corners, waiting, watching, always hungry. But not for flesh or blood, no, the Night Walker hungers for souls. It was late, too late for anyone sensible to be out. Derek Winters had never been one for rational decisions. The bar had long since been closed, and his body swayed like a leaf in the cold wind as he staggered down the crooked streets. The lights from the nearby shops had dimmed, leaving only the flicker of dying streetlights to illuminate the labyrinth alleys. His phone was dead, his wallet was empty, and the bitter taste of cheap whiskey, clung to his tongue. He stumbled onto an unfamiliar and eerily quiet side street, where the air seemed colder than it had the right to be. That's when he noticed it. A symbol carved into the brick wall beside him. It was an eye, crude and jagged, surrounded by a series of lines that spiraled out like tentacles. He reached to touch it, but a deep voice whispered, "Don't." He wasn't sure why, but the sight of the symbol sent a shiver down his spine, and the hairs on his arms prickled. As he pulled his hand back, he saw something in the darkness ahead. A figure, tall and thin, cloaked in shadow. It didn't move or breathe. It stood there, watching him, lifeless, like the trunk of a tree. Derek's heart pounded in his chest. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice wavering. The figure stepped forward, its movements unnaturally smooth, like it glided on air. Derek's throat tightened as he caught a glimpse of its eyes, dark, hollow, and endless, like twin voids that threatened to swallow him whole. The world seemed to tilt as Derek turned and ran, his footsteps echoing down the empty street. But as he fled, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone. Something was following him, close enough that he could feel the chill of its breath at his back, at the back of his neck. He didn't dare look back. Derek hopped in his father's old truck and sped off as the smell of faded cologne mixed with exhaust hung in the air. Days passed, and Derek tried to forget the encounter, dismissing it as a drunken hallucination. But the fear had taken root, a tiny seed that grew with each passing night. He began to hear the whispers in the corners of his mind, stories about the Night Walker. He wasn't the only one who had seen it. There were others. People who spoke in hushed tones about a figure that haunted the lost, who appeared to those who had given up on themselves. The rumors varied, but one detail remained constant: the Night Walker's cave. Somewhere on the outskirts of the city, hidden among the twisted trees and overgrown thickets, there was said to be a cave where the Night Walker kept his trophies. Souls trapped in the darkness, neither living nor dead, their bodies long decayed but their spirits eternally imprisoned. Someone said that the souls had surrendered willingly, that they had been lost for so long that they could no longer bear the weight of their own existence. Others claimed the Night Walker was a judge, not evil nor good, but just. He gave the lost a choice: to give in or to fight. If they chose to surrender, he took them. If they struggled against their despair, he would leave them be. But he was always there, lingering at the edges of their vision, waiting for their will to falter. Derek was losing sleep. His nights were plagued with nightmares, visions of a dark cave where whispers filled the air, and the walls seemed to pulse like a living thing. He saw faces in the shadows, their mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the grave. And always in the distance, he saw the figure watching him. It was inviting, as well as hiding something. At the end of the jar of souls was one in particular. One jar that, no matter how close he got to it, would wake him up to the sound of thunder cracking just before the illumination of lightning. Unable to see what it was in there, it called to him. Derek's life had begun to unravel. He lost his job, his friends stopped returning his calls, and the small apartment he called home felt more like a prison with each passing day. The city seemed to stretch and contract like a living thing, its streets widening in ways that made no sense as if the world was twisting. And everywhere he went, he saw the symbols carved into the walls, painted on sidewalks, scratched into sides of benches. Each seemed to pull him deeper, dragging him closer to the darkness he had glimpsed that night. He couldn't escape the feeling that the Nightwalker was closing in, his presence like a shadow cast over Derek's every walking moment. The whispers grew louder, and Derek stood at the edge of the park where he had first seen the figure, staring into the darkness beyond the trees. He was being drawn there like a moth to a flame. He took a step forward, and then another. The cold air was growing thicker with each step. The city's lights faded behind him, swallowed by the night, and Derek felt the world narrow to a single path. It led him to a place where the ground sloped downward into a narrow ravine. The mouth of the cave loomed ahead, its entrance a gaping maw that seemed to exhale a chill so deep it froze the breath in his lungs. The cave was silent, but Derek could feel it. It was alive. A darkness that pushed with a faint rhythmic beat, like the slow, steady pulse of a heart. He hesitated at the entrance, his body trembling, his instincts screamed to turn back. But something else pushed him forward, a need to understand why he had been chosen. The darkness devoured him as he stepped inside, his footsteps reverberating through the cavernous gloom. The air grew dense and suffocating. A damp, musty odor clung to his skin and filled his lungs like stagnant water. As his eyes gradually adjusted, shapes began to emerge from the shadows. Rows upon rows of jars lining the walls, stretching into the blackness. Each jar was a prison, some containing only faces, pale and distorted, their features twisted in expressions of despair or rage. Others held warped figures, limbs bent at unnatural angles, frozen in a grotesque tableau. Some jars glowed faintly, the interiors flickering with light like distant fireflies, while others lay shrouded in darkness, their glass cloudy and thick with swirling smoke. A murmur of voices rose and fell among the jars, some whispering like a breeze through the dead leaves, others seething with hate, their words lost to an endless loop of agony. Derek's breath caught in his throat as he realized what they were. Bodies, or what was left of them. Their flesh had long decayed, but their spirits lingered, suspended in a state of living death. The souls were trapped within their hollow shells, their eyes empty and lifeless. Yet as he looked closer, he saw that some of them still moved, their mouths parting to whisper words he could not understand. A deep and resonant voice echoed through the cave, sending shivers down his spine. "You've come a long way, Derek," it said, in a calm and measured tone. "But you're not here by accident." Derek turned and saw the Nightwalker standing before him, The figure's eyes glowed faintly in the darkness, not with malice, but with a cold, indifferent gaze. What are you? Derek's voice trembled, barely a whisper. I am the keeper of lost souls, the Nightwalker replied, reverberating through the cavern. I offer those who wander a choice, to pass on or to fight for a second chance. Most choose darkness. They surrender to it willingly, and I take them. Derek felt the weight of the words settle over him like a shroud. And if I choose to fight? He asked, though his voice was weak, his strength already waning. The Nightwalker's eyes narrowed. Then you must prove your will is stronger than your despair, it said. But be warned, Derek. The longer you wander, the more the darkness will consume you. If you lose yourself, you will become a part of this place, one of my trophies. As if on cue, the whispers in the cave grew louder, a chorus of pleading voices tugging at Derek's very soul. He could feel his resolve slipping away, the darkness clawing at his mind, urging him to give in. It would be so easy to just let go, to fall into the abyss and end the struggle. For a moment, he considered it. The weight of his failures and the pain of his regrets could be erased instantly if he just gave up. Derek remembered the jar at the end of the stairwell. As he made his way down the stairwell, which was made of twine, bark, and moss, the Nightwalker spoke. Things lost in the dark are sometimes meant to stay there, Derek. Some wounds remain scars. The Nightwalker's ancient voice echoed down. Derek had to know what was in the last jar. He paid no mind to the walker's caution and kept walking. His hands were sweaty, and his stride became a slow saunter. His heart began to beat faster, and his hands ticked as he became anxious. As the jar was close enough to see, he finally realized what he was looking at. The scent of his father's cologne mingled with the damp, stale air of the cave, clawing at his senses. As he reached out, his fingers trembling, a faint warmth radiated from the glass, a ghost of his father's once reassuring presence. The figure in the jar turned around as Derek saw the figure of his father. His face was elongated, his eyes sunken in, and the figure only showed half what a human should. A trapped and lost soul that had lost a battle no one knew about. Choked up, Derek spoke. Father? He said, unable to comprehend. The words "I'm sorry" hung to the back of his throat, unable to surface. His knees weak as shock ran through him, and sorrow rushed through his blood. Tears began to spiral off his face. The figure tried to speak, but nothing came of it. The cloud-like arms flailed, banging on the glass jar. Anger spouted from the once calm figure. Derek clung to the jar, looking around the darkness, wishing for an escape. But all there was the oppressive silence in the cold cave of despair. The Nightwalker placed his tree-like hand on the jar, picking it up like a scientist looking at one of his specimens. He's mine, Derek, he said, shaking the jar with no concern as the reflection glistened in his eyes. Just like the rest of them, they found their solace here, where time has no hold on them and their pain but a whisper. The Nightwalker placed the jar down, like a father placing his sleepless child in bed. Stay, Derek. The Nightwalker's voice slithered through the air, as cold as the shadows. The world has been cruel to you. I can ease the burden. Here you can linger, untouched by time, with him, forever. It's been a long 10 years, Derek. Let me guide you to peace and salvation. You won't find that up there. I know. I never did. That's why I live here between life and death. That's why I save people from their own doings. The ones that don't belong, they find me. And in their last moments, I bring them here. Derek takes a step back. And empathetic tears turn into an aggressive outburst of anger. What did you do to him? His face contorted. His pain and anger rushed through him. His hands trembled as realization set in. The night walker stood taller, his voice resonant. Your father chose his path. I do not make the futile choices of men. I am beyond that existence. If one enters my domain, it is of their own doing. Let him go, Derek said, his words sharp like a razor. I cannot change the past, Derek, any more than I can change the weather. Those are the talents I do not possess, the walker said, detached and unbothered. Free yourself, Derek, his words slithered out, conniving and domineering. He took a step back, forcing air into his lungs. Memories of his failures flooded his thoughts. He felt the darkness tightening its grip. But as he stood on the edge of surrender, something stirred deep within. A flicker of defiance. A spark that refused to be extinguished. It was faint and almost smothered by the darkness that clung to him, but it was enough. No, he whispered. Then louder, his voice breaking through the stillness. No, I won't be a prisoner of your deception. Derek approached the jars of screaming injustice, each one an artifact of despair. Some were misshapen, warped by the trauma they held. Others were clear and empty, yet darkness oozed in and out like a restless tide. His father's jar stood out, a bottle shaped like the cologne they had once shared, its glass cloudy as if choked with sorrow. A man who gave everything for his son. A man who was lost in loneliness and betrayal. He could smell his father's cologne emitting, bringing him back to the day they bought it. Derek had been 15, his mind caught in video games, sports, and whatever viral video was trending that week. When his father's truck pulled up, Derek hadn't even looked up from his phone. His father had talked almost the whole drive, his words drifting like background noise. The sudden spray of cologne in the mall startled Derek from his trance. His father's smile was wide, but his eyes, had Derek bothered to look, were brimming with something else. They bought matching bottles that day, a small gesture to feel closer, even when apart. It was the last time Derek saw him. Derek gripped the jar tightly, wishing he could turn back time and undo the past. Derek's father couldn't speak. In his end, the silence was shattered by a single thunderous choice, a mouthful of cold steel and despair. It was my fault, Derek whispered, his voice raw. If I hadn't been so wrapped up in my own world, maybe, just maybe, he wouldn't have felt so alone. His throat tightened as the darkness wrapped around him, a suffocating weight. It should have been me. The Nightwalker placed his brute hand on Derek's shoulder. The weight of the world clings to you like a shadow, Derek, but it's not a burden you must bear alone. The walker watched him, its expression unchanged. Your father saw visions as well. He had a choice to make, and he chose himself over you, it said, its voice carrying a note of finality. Very well. Remember, Derek, I will always be here, waiting. Let us both pray we never meet again. With those words, the Nightwalker faded into the darkness, and the cave seemed to breathe a sigh of relief as the whispers began to fade. Derek stumbled back toward the entrance, his legs weak, but his spirit unbroken. As he emerged into the night, he looked back at the cave one last time, and the darkness seemed to stare back at him, patient and still. The symbols remained etched in his mind, reminders of his choice. The Nightwalker had given him a chance, but was not a gift. It was a burden, a promise that darkness would always be near, watching, waiting for the day Derek's will would falter again. The legend of the Nightwalker is whispered still, a tale of a dark figure that emerges to those who have lost their way. It is not evil nor good, but just. A shadow cast by despair, an ancient thing older than light. It offers a choice to those it finds: surrender, pass on, or fight for a second chance. Yet many more are claimed for every soul that escapes, becoming trophies in the cave where the darkness waits. Some say it's a warning, a reminder that our choices shape our paths. Others claim it's a judgment passed on to the broken and weary, a sentence for those who wander too close to the edge. But there are darker and quieter whispers suggesting that those who truly know the truth never speak of it. For even in the light, the darkness is never far behind, and the Nightwalker will always be there, lurking in the shadows, hungry for the souls of the lost. On some nights, when the shadows grow long, Derek can almost swear he sees his father's reflection in the glass, his eyes hollow, his gaze fixed on a place far beyond. Chapter 10. Nightwalker.